For casuals, the name Herpo the Foul isn't going to mean a lot, and that's because his origins come from the deepest parts of Harry Potter lore. But those who do know the name will also know that he was one of the darkest wizards in wizarding history. The man, if you could call him that, credited with creating the very first Horcrux, crossing a magical line so horrific most witches and wizards barely discuss it. But Herpo didn't stop there, as he actually went on to conduct more and more twisted dark arts experiments, crossing lines regularly that no other wizard ever dared. And to this day, his name is associated with some of the most disturbing and unnatural magic the wizarding world has ever seen. Now, what if I told you that he knew Hagrid? Today we'll be diving into all of this and more as we discuss the strange connection between the wizarding world's darkest wizard and our humble Hogwarts gamekeeper. Let's dive into it. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Herpo originally hailed from ancient Greece, remember that. And although we don't have an exact date as to when Herpo walked the earth, we do know that it was a long time ago, as he is commonly referred to as one of the earliest known dark wizards. We also know that he's the original Horcrux creator and probably immortal. When Herpo first walked the earth, magic wasn't new, but it was being pushed more than ever in terms of its limits, particularly on the darker side of the spectrum. This is largely in part due to the ongoing wizarding and muggle conflict, where witches and wizards were being demonized and hunted by the muggle population. Many witches and wizards were forced to hide, to retreat, taking the moral high ground by not retaliating and potentially making the situation more dire. However, some witches and wizards, like Herpo the Foul, used this era to practice the worst kinds of dark arts imaginable, all in the name of retribution. Where a morally good magical practitioner in this time may have practiced something like a concealment charm in hopes of better hiding the wizarding population, his evil counterpart would likely spend his efforts trying to produce a spell that could eradicate muggles. Herpo chose the latter. First he made Horcruxes, and later on he even created the first basilisk, an enormous serpentine creature whose creation is often wrongfully credited to Hogwarts founder Salazar Slytherin. Though Slytherin created his own, this was not the original basilisk that Herpo had created. Of the many fearsome beasts and monsters that roam our land, there is none more curious or more deadly than the basilisk, known also as the King of Serpents. This snake, which may reach gigantic size and live many hundreds of years, is born from a chicken's egg, hatched beneath a toad. Its methods of killing are most wondrous, for aside from its deadly and venomous fangs, the basilisk has a murderous stare, and all who are fixed with the beam of its eye shall suffer instant death. Spiders flee before the basilisk, for it is their mortal enemy, and the basilisk flees only from the crowing of the rooster, which is fatal to it. Given that Herpo created the basilisk, I think it's fair to say that he had a fascination with massive, powerful creatures. This brings us to his connection to Hagrid. In the Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid's pet dog, Fluffy, is put in place to protect the Philosopher's Stone. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog, a dog that filled the whole space between ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling, mad eyes, 3 noses, twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from yellowish fangs. And while Fluffy is often remembered as a fun early series creature encounter, he was actually an incredibly important part of the security surrounding the stone itself. He was specifically trusted by Dumbledore and the other professors to guard one of the most valuable and dangerous magical objects in existence. And it absolutely makes sense why. Fluffy wasn't just large, he was completely terrifying and absolutely enormous. A gigantic 3-headed dog capable of killing intruders almost instantly, stationed directly above the hidden chambers protecting the stone. In fact, the only known way past him was music, which would lull him to sleep temporarily. But I guess now the question is, where does one obtain a gigantic 3-headed dog? According to Hagrid, he got him down the pub. Fluffy? Yeah, he's mine. Bought him off a Greek chappie I met in the pub last year. I lent him to Dumbledore to guard the... And all of this becomes very interesting when you consider that A, Herpo the Foul happened to be a Greek gentleman with an affinity for large creatures, and B, that Fluffy is very clearly inspired by Cerberus from Greek mythology, the monstrous 3-headed hound that guards the underworld. Rowling doesn't even try to hide the inspiration here. 3 heads, massive size, monstrous temperament. It's Cerberus almost beat for beat. The following passage from Greek myth supports this. In a cave opposite, stretched at enormous length, lay Cerberus, the monstrous triple-throated hound, whose barking filled the whole realm with noise. And what was Cerberus's role in Greek mythology? Why, he was the Hound of Hell, of course, known for guarding the gates of the underworld and preventing the dead from escaping. And there's actually another really interesting symbolic layer here as well. In Harry Potter, Fluffy is used to protect the Philosopher's Stone, an object tied to immortality, eternal life, and the defeat of death itself. So just like Cerberus guarded the realm of the dead in Greek mythology, Fluffy guards one of the only magical objects in the Wizarding world capable of extending human life beyond its natural limits. Quick side note, because this feels like a natural plug, I do have a mythology channel for those interested called Mythology Explained. Go check it out if you're interested in that sort of thing. So what am I suggesting? That Hagrid bought Fluffy from Herpo, of course. Now, ordinarily this theory would completely fall apart because of the timeline. Herpo the Foul lived in the ancient world, thousands of years before Hagrid was ever born. So the idea that Hagrid could have literally met him down at the pub sounds absurd. Except for one very important detail. Herpo created the first Horcrux, and Horcruxes exist for one reason: to tether a wizard to mortal life beyond natural death. That was the entire point. So if any wizard in history had the potential to survive for centuries, perhaps even millennia, it would be Herpo the Foul. Which is why suddenly, at least to me, the idea of some mysterious Greek chappie selling monstrous magical creatures in a pub doesn't sound quite so impossible anymore. And even if Rowling never intended this as a literal reveal, I still think the symbolism here is very deliberate. An ancient Greek dark wizard associated with serpents, forbidden knowledge, unnatural immortality, and monstrous creatures being connected to a Cerberus-like hound straight out of Greek mythology and to the underworld itself. At a certain point, Herpo stops feeling like just another dark wizard, and instead starts to resemble something much darker, almost like the Wizarding World's version of the devil. This would also quietly reinforce Herpo being the first dark wizard to successfully produce a Horcrux. I mean, who better to unlock a branch of magic like that than a figure designed to embody ultimate corruption itself? That's another reason the Wizarding Devil comparison works so well here. In mythology and religion, devil figures are often tied to forbidden knowledge, the ones who introduce humanity to dangerous ideas that permanently corrupt things afterward. And that's exactly what Herpo may have done with Horcruxes. Because the moment Herpo proved it was possible to split the soul and survive, the damage was already done. From that point onward, every future dark wizard obsessed with immortality suddenly had a path to follow. A temptation sitting there in the shadows of magical history, waiting to corrupt the next power-hungry wizard desperate enough to pursue it. And centuries later, Voldemort did exactly that. There's also the fact that Fluffy isn't really a breed. He's not some recognized magical species that we see repeatedly throughout the series. He's essentially a one-of-a-kind monster, an enormous three-headed killing machine seemingly modeled directly after a mythological creature from the underworld itself. We don't see other Fluffies. And all of this starts to feel very familiar once you remember Herpo's history. Because this is exactly the sort of thing he was known for. Not just taming dangerous creatures, but creating them, twisting magic and nature together in unnatural ways in order to produce entirely new horrors that had never existed before. That's exactly what he did when he created the first basilisk. And who are we supposed to group together with the Hound of Hell and a giant basilisk, if not the devil himself? I know it all sounds a bit crazy, but we have to remember that Hagrid buying Fluffy from a Greek guy at the pub sounds insane in the first place. And if Herpo was truly immortal and wasn't openly trying to rule the Wizarding world, then what would even be keeping him busy? At a certain point, I'd expect an ancient figure like that to fade into the shadows, lurking on the fringes of the Wizarding world, trading dangerous creatures, experimenting with forbidden magic, operating through whispers, rumors, and half-forgotten encounters in dark pubs. And that's part of what makes this theory so creepy to me. Hagrid may not have realized who he was talking to. To Hagrid, it was just some odd Greek chappie with a strange pet to sell. But if this theory is true, then Hagrid may have casually crossed paths with the single darkest individual in human and wizarding history. In mythology and folklore, the devil rarely appears as some giant horned monster sitting on a throne of fire. More often he appears quietly, as a stranger, someone encountered briefly at a crossroads or in a tavern, or during some seemingly insignificant interaction that only becomes meaningful afterward. Someone who meddles, tempts, trades, lingers in the shadows of society rather than openly ruling it. And when you think about it that way, the image of some mysterious Greek chappie casually selling monstrous creatures down at the pub starts to feel weirdly fitting. the sort of figure people occasionally cross paths with without ever realizing who they've actually met. There's also another layer to all of this that I think is worth mentioning. Throughout mythology and religion, serpents are very often tied to temptation, corruption, and evil itself. In Christianity, the devil famously appears in the form of a serpent in the Garden of Eden, tempting humanity toward forbidden knowledge and ultimately toward corruption. And honestly, the parallels to Herpo start to become pretty difficult to ignore once you look at his story through that lens. Because Herpo wasn't just associated with snakes, he was obsessed with them. He was one of the earliest known parselmouths, meaning he could literally speak to serpents. He then went on to create the very first basilisk. And on top of that, he pioneered Horcruxes, magical objects rooted entirely in soul corruption, forbidden knowledge, and unnatural immortality. A mysterious ancient figure tied to serpents, temptation, forbidden magic, soul mutilation, immortality, monstrous underworld creatures, and the corruption of nature itself. It almost feels like Rowling was creating a mythological archetype, the closest thing the wizarding world has to Satan himself. I guess now the only question is, why sell Fluffy in the first place, and why to Hagrid? Honestly, Hagrid may have been the perfect person to approach. Hagrid absolutely adored dangerous creatures. In fact, the more terrifying and uncontrollable a creature was, the more fascinated he seemed to become by it. Dragons, acromantulas, blast-ended scroots, it didn't matter. Where most witches and wizards saw monsters, Hagrid saw misunderstood animals deserving of care and affection. And that makes him uniquely vulnerable in a situation like this. Because if Herpo truly was lurking on the fringes of the wizarding world after centuries of immortality, lurking in taverns, then Hagrid would be an ideal target. A kind-hearted magical creature enthusiast who probably wouldn't ask too many questions as long as the beast itself fascinated him. If a random stranger walked into a pub and offered you a gigantic three-headed dog, most people would run in the opposite direction. But Hagrid, he'd probably ask how much. I guess now the question is, why? What would Herpo have to gain? I think he was probably just meddling. That's something we see constantly with devil figures in mythology. They interfere quietly, they tempt, they manipulate, they place dangerous things in front of people and simply wait to see what happens afterward. A mysterious encounter in a tavern that seems insignificant at the time, but later turns out to have massive consequences. Fluffy did end up becoming a part of a chain of events surrounding one of the most dangerous magical objects in existence. Voldemort eventually breached the protection surrounding the stone. Students nearly died, Hogwarts was thrown into chaos, and at the center of it all was Hagrid casually obtaining a monstrous three-headed creature from some mysterious Greek stranger down at the pub. And this sounds exactly like the sort of bizarre, chaotic chain of events you might expect from all of this. What do you guys think? Is Herpo the devil? Is he the one who sold Fluffy to Hagrid? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Let me know what I've got right and what I've got wrong. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.